Hi, I'm Emily and welcome back to Pepper Knits. I am a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia, and today I want to share everything I knit in 2024. I love watching these videos. I think it's such a fun way to find new podcasters and be able to get a sense of their style of knitting and the things that they like to knit. I also really enjoy watching them from podcasters who I have been following throughout the year and be able to get an idea of how much they like a project now that they've had a chance to wear it a few times, and hear their thoughts on how well it has worn and whether they would perhaps knit it again. So I hope this will be interesting for you, whether you have been watching me throughout the year and you know what I've been knitting, or you're new to the channel and you just want to be updated on what I have been up to this year. So I have surprised myself this year, and when I was going through the list of things that I've been making, I was quite surprised at the number of projects that I've gifted. Most of them have been socks with a few accessories and one baby knit in there. I did also make and gift one sweater. So in total this year I knit 33 projects. 6 of those are accessories with that one baby knit. I knit 12 pairs of socks, 4 summer garments, and 12 sweaters, which surprised me a lot when I saw that number because that averages to 1 sweater a month. That just seems like a crazy number of sweaters, and now I can see them all piled up here. That is a lot of knitting, so it's nice to be able to see a wrap up of the year. Obviously, there is not a right or wrong number of projects that you should be knitting throughout the year, and I'm very fortunate that I'm able to afford the yarn and the materials and have the time to be making all of these projects, but it is really nice to sit down and see all of the hard work that I have been doing throughout the year. I think it's also good to really assess each garment and take any learnings into the new year when I'm planning out future projects. So I'm just going to jump straight into it. My plan is to break it up into categories. So first I'm going to share all of my sweaters, then I'll go through my summer knits, then my socks, and then a few accessories at the end. So the first sweater is kind of like a 2-in-1. I did knit 2 Lanark sweaters this year. This is a pattern by Rebecca Clow, and I knit both of them in the drop soft tweed. I knit mine in the colour Grizzly Bear, and my sister's version is in the grey colour, which I think is called Cobblestone. We both get a ton of wear out of our Lanark sweaters. I think it's a combination of the style and how casual and easy it is to wear every day, and also the yarn and the thickness of the fabric. I have previously knit a zipper sweater, and it was before the light version came out. I just find that if I'm gonna wear a quarter zip sweater, I reach for this one just because it's a DK weight and that one is worsted, and it's just far too warm for me to be wearing most of the time, so I do reach for this one fairly often. The yarn has worn fairly well. Considering the drops tweed is a bit more of an affordable option, I would have loved to have used the Rowan tweed yarn, but at the time my budget just wouldn't allow to knit an all over half fisherman's rib textured sweater in a bit more of a pricey yarn. So I think considering the price point, this yarn has worn fairly well. It is an alpaca and wool blend, so it does have a really nice drape to it. Because it is blended with that wool, I found that it barely pills, and I have a feeling the half fisherman's rib texture also counteracts a little bit of the pilling as well. But considering the amount that I've worn it, I think this is in really good condition. I don't think I've ever depilled this. I've probably washed it a couple of times, but yeah, I'm really happy with how this yarn is wearing. I did make one modification to both of these, and that was knitting the panels flat and then seaming them at the end. As a first option, the pattern does have you knit everything in the round, but I just found my stitch definition wasn't as good when I swapped to knitting in the round, and it was quite obvious because obviously the yoke is knit flat, and then you could really see where I had swapped to knitting in the round. So I did just knit it flat, and it was actually more enjoyable that way, and then managed to seam everything up at the underarms and the side seams. I think also having that mattress stitch seam just gave it a little bit more structure that this yarn definitely needed because of the alpaca content. It does have that drapiness, and I think having the seams in there just, yeah, gives it a little bit more rigidity to hold its shape. Next up is my Maria sweater, and this is designed by Claudia Quintanilla from Unit Toronto, and they very kindly gifted me this pattern. The original pattern does call for a lace weight merino and then a lace weight mohair, but that would have ended up costing a fortune, so I did swap out to a fingering weight alpaca yarn. The yarn is the Juniper Moon Farm Harriet Fine, and I love this yarn. It's the first time I've used it, and it does have some polyamide in it, so I think it would be good for socks as well. It's such a soft and luxurious yarn, and I think it really suits the overall style of this sweater. If you watched any of my podcast episodes where I was knitting this, you know that I had so much trouble with the sleeves, and in the end we've just ended up with these 3/4 length sleeves. I think the reason that I ran out of yarn is that I made such a big yarn substitution, so that was really disappointing because I would have liked to have had these as long sleeves. I did try and order one more skein to finish off the sleeves, but when it arrived it was a totally different dye lot and it looked completely different. So that was really disappointing. I don't think any amount of blending would have fixed that. So I did end up having to go with the 3/4 length sleeves. I don't hate them, but yeah, like I said, I think I would have preferred to have been able to finish the pattern because it does have a little bit of color work at the cuff as well. The thing that really drew me to this pattern is the color work section that's on the bottom of the body. It has this really unique color work motif that goes all the way around the front and the back, and I absolutely love how it looks. I also added in some really nice beading onto the color work, which was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed doing something different. It definitely makes this quite a dressy piece, and I think it will probably limit the amount of occasions that I can wear it, but at the same time I think it's kind of nice to have a special piece like this in my wardrobe that I can pull out for more special occasions. I haven't had a chance to wear this at all because I did finish it far too close to the beginning of the warmer weather here in Perth. My one concern about this sweater is how fitted and tight the underarms are. I probably should have gone up a size in the pattern or adjusted for maybe my row gauge being a little bit shorter and added a little bit extra length here. I think I probably assumed that this yarn would grow a lot more lengthways than it did, and perhaps it will with a little bit of wear, but yes, the underarm on the sleeve is fairly close to my actual underarm. It's not to the point of being uncomfortable where I just want to take this off straight away, but I have a feeling it probably will get quite warm as I'm wearing it throughout the day. I also really love this picot neckline. I didn't realize that it was in the pattern when I started knitting it until I got to that point, but I think it's such a fun feature that really adds to the femininity and elegance of this design. I have a feeling this yarn will probably pill quite a lot because it is so soft and it's alpaca. But like I was saying, I think this will be reserved for more special occasions anyway, so hopefully we won't have too many issues with that. This is my Salty Days sweater, which is designed by Veronica Lindberg, and I knit this as part of the knit along hosted by Hayley Space and Morgan Unraveled. I quite enjoyed knitting this, and I do quite like the finished object, but it's not one of my most worn and not one of my most favorite sweaters that I knit this year. The yarn combination is really fun. I used John Arbon Devonia 4-ply in the colour Devonia Cream, and the colourful speckles are from Hedgehog Fibres, and I used a merino lace strand to hold with the fingering weight yarn. In hindsight, I probably should have held the main yarn or the lace weight double, or just found a different yarn altogether for this. It is designed as more of a worsted weight sweater or like a DK with a mohair, so I think from the beginning my yarn choice probably set me up to not do very well. I did film a project vlog throughout the making of this garment, so that goes into a lot more detail about the challenge that I had and yeah, just kind of how I overcame a lot of those. The main issue again for this was the sleeves, and they were way too fitted the first couple of times that I knit them. I'm still not completely happy with them. I mean, they have like quite a lot of ease all the way down the sleeve, and they're basically just a tube with a few decreases at the cuff, but not that many. I have just noticed that this does have a very weird balloon shape on both of these, which I'm not a huge fan of. I don't know if it's because of this lace panel here or if it's just the way that I had it pinned when I was blocking it, but yeah, that is kind of annoying me. This is another sweater that I haven't had a chance to wear a huge amount. I have worn it a couple of times before the weather ended up getting too warm, and I think because it is all over lace, it does lend itself a little bit better to more transitional weather. And actually saying that, if I had knit it out of a worsted weight yarn combination, that might have limited the wear that I could get out of it as well. I think because it is kind of like a fingering DK weight sweater, it does mean that I can wear it on slightly warmer days. The process of knitting this was quite interesting. I know a lot of people were running into the same issues in the knit along group. I do remember saying at the end of that project vlog that I also wasn't super happy with how the body at the bottom was sitting. Like the bottom ribbing is probably a little bit too tight, and I feel like it just sits at a bit of an awkward place, and there's sometimes a little bit of a balloon shape happening. I think because it finishes kind of right at the widest part of my hips, so it just kind of clings in a little bit weird and wants to ride up. I could probably fix that by redoing the ribbing and redoing the bind off, perhaps on a larger needle size. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as it is. It doesn't bother me enough to want to go back and rip all of that out and re-knit it. Or my other option would have just been to knit a size up, which quite honestly I probably should have done. There is definitely some positive ease across the bust of this sweater, but I think looking at the pattern pictures and other people's versions, I think I would have liked it a little bit better if I had slightly more ease. I'm thinking for next year I would like to explore knitting sweaters with a little bit more positive ease and just see if I like that a little bit better. I think I'm not going to truly know how much wear I'll get out of this sweater until next winter comes around. Like I said, I haven't got a ton of wear out of this so far. But yeah, overall, it's definitely not one of my most favorite sweaters that I've knit this year, but it's definitely not one that I'm thinking about frogging to reclaim the yarn. This is not a good hairstyle for constantly trying different sweaters on, so I'm gonna have to just take those pins out. But speaking of favorite sweaters, this is 100% my most worn, my most favorite sweater that I knit this year. This is the Cognac sweater. It is designed by Marine from Atelier Cassan, and I test knit this way back, I think this time last year. I did finish it in January, so I am counting it as something I knit in 2024. I did the majority of the knitting, and I think I finished all of the knitting off when I was on a trip back to England to see family, and I also went over to Ireland with my boyfriend, and that is where we got engaged. So I have so many happy memories attached to this sweater of being freshly engaged and having an amazing holiday with my family, and yeah, it was just such a good time, and I have all of those happy memories like knit into this sweater. I'm also in love with the yarn combination that I use for this sweater. The main strand is Wool & Works Fingering Merino in the colour Fur Coat. That was from the Barbie collection that she did, I think, last year. I held it with a strand of Fibre Space Cumulus. I really love the Fibre Space Cumulus. It's incredibly soft, and I think it pairs so perfectly with this beautiful hand-dyed yarn without detracting from the beauty of the hand-dyed yarn. I think it really adds to it. The fit of this is absolutely perfect. I love the construction. I love the perfectly rounded neckline. And yeah, it's just such a beautiful sweater, and I reach for it all the time. So this sweater is knit up at a fairly loose gauge. I think I used a 5.5mm needle, and it just creates a beautiful, open and airy fabric. It is just absolutely perfect for the climate that I live in, and I think that in combination with everything else is why I reach for this so often. It definitely needs a wash at this point. I can really see that the Cumulus is starting to get a little bit flat and just needs a wash to like fluff it back up a little bit. I cannot speak highly enough about this design. I love the construction. I love that for my size, and I think the first few sizes you can get away with only 2 100-gram skeins of your main yarn, so it's perfect for using those special skeins of hand-dyed yarn, or if you just want a really cost-effective fluffy sweater. Marine is also just such a lovely person, so I would definitely recommend checking out her other designs if this one catches your eye. And I'm not done yapping about this pattern yet, because I did make a second version. Whilst I was in Ireland, I did go into This Is Knit in Dublin, and I bought the yarn to make this one. So before I'd even finished that first version, I was already buying yarn and planning a second version. This is knit in the Studio Donegal Darnie yarn, held with a strand of the Camarosa Midnight Sol, which again is kind of like a mohair alternative. I'm not someone who tolerates mohair very well. So for this version, I did opt for the I-cord finishing instead of the twisted rib, just to have something a little bit different. I love how the feel of this sweater is so different to the first one that I knit. I think because the yarn combination is a little bit more on the rustic side. The Midnight Sol is definitely not as like soft and lofty as the Fibre Space Cumulus, but that was kind of my intention, so I could really allow the main yarn on this to show through a little bit more. It does have all these beautiful tan and black and blue speckles all throughout it, so I didn't want something super fluffy that was going to hide all of that. I did make a little bit of a mistake when I was buying the yarn. Maybe I was just too overwhelmed. There was too much going on. I was too excited to be in Dublin and yarn shopping, and I underbought the Midnight Sol by probably about a full skein. I think I should have bought one more. I remember thinking that at the time, maybe I should just get one more to be safe, and for some reason I didn't, and I really regret doing that. My sleeves have ended up a little bit too short, and also the body is fairly cropped. It's definitely not unwearable, but I would have preferred it to have just had a little bit more length in the sleeves and the body. In hindsight, I probably should have just ordered another skein online. Because it is the second strand, I think even a change in dye lot wouldn't have been the end of the world. But here we are. I still do get quite a bit of wear out of this, not as much as my first version. I tend to wear this a bit more like a comfy sweatshirt around the house, or if I'm going to Pilates and I want an extra layer, I'll throw this over the top. But I suppose that really adds to the pattern that I have two completely different garments that fit different needs in my wardrobe and I think look completely different, but they're the same pattern. So I think that really shows how good value this pattern is, and I think I'm going to stop talking about it now because I do have a lot more to get through. So my first cognac sweater was my most worn sweater this year. This by far is the sweater I'm most proud of making, and every time I look at it I'm like, oh my goodness, I made that with my own two hands and like pieces of yarn. I just can't believe that I actually knit an all over stranded colorwork sweater at a fingering weight gauge. It just blows my mind that, I don't know, somehow I thought that was going to be a good idea and I committed to it and actually finished this sweater. This is the Daisy sweater designed by Solvara Knitwear. She has recently released a chunky version of the sweater, so if you're not into doing color work at a fingering weight gauge, which I don't blame you, there is the option to do the chunky version now instead. I use the recommended yarn for this pattern, which is Asaga Tavini, and it's the first time I've used this yarn. It is so good at color work. It's super rustic and feels rough, but I don't find this itchy at all. I'd say I have fairly sensitive skin and I can definitely feel this on me. That could be more to do with the fact it's like 40 degrees right now and I'm wearing a 100% wool sweater, but I do really love this yarn, and I think if I was going to knit more colorwork sweaters in the future, I would really consider purchasing this. There were a lot of new techniques for me in this sweater. Mostly it was positioning the chart on the raglan and through all of the increases. I'd never done that before, and for me it was just really tricky to wrap my brain around where I was putting the chart and making sure it was centered and how that was going to look in the end. I was really struggling to visualize that, so I'm quite proud of myself for pushing through and figuring it out. And I remember I did have to do quite a bit of frogging. I went into this project thinking that my first attempt at it was going to get frogged, so that definitely eased the pain of having to rip back all of the color work that I had done. There are also Japanese short rows to shape the neckline in this, and that was the first time I tried that technique as well. So there was a lot of things to be keeping track of in my brain. I really didn't enjoy doing the Japanese short rows. I found them quite fiddly, but I do think it's a technique that looks the best in color work like this. I'm no designer, no expert in short rows, but I think that was an intentional decision by the designer to incorporate those type of short rows. I definitely didn't do them perfectly, and I think there's a section here where I should have caught floats and it's kind of left a little bit of a hole, but you know, at the end of the day, in the scheme of the sweater, I don't think it's really that noticeable. The yellow centers on all of the flowers is duplicate stitched on afterwards, so that was really nice. That meant that I only had to use two colors at a time, and then I just went in afterwards and yeah, duplicate stitched all of the yellow on as well. I did think that was going to be a huge task that would take me hours and hours, and whilst it wasn't super quick, it actually didn't take as long as I thought and was really nice and meditative to do that duplicate stitch. It's not a technique that I use very often. The one thing about this yarn though is that my Italian or tubular binder for the bottom has snapped a few times, so there is just loose yarn hanging off the bottom. You can see this yarn here is just hanging off. I will also admit that I accidentally wove in some of these ends on the right side, and because this yarn is so toothy and grippy, which is what makes it great at color work, it was so tricky to undo that end. So I did just leave it on the right side. I don't know if that has something to do with the fact that the bind off keeps breaking on the hem. Maybe I just did it too tightly. This yarn is a little bit on the thinner side, but I think because it is toothy enough, it's meant that not the whole thing has unraveled. Eventually at some point, I should probably go back in and redo the ribbing and the bind off, and maybe think about a different type of bind off that would give it a little bit more stretch, but for now I'm just gonna leave it. I will say that this isn't something that I get a huge amount of wear out of. I think partly it's because it is such a statement sweater and it's not something I reach for every day. I also find sometimes that the neckline sits a little bit funny. I have found this in other garments before where I've just wished that I had more short rows in there, so maybe that's just a little bit more of a me problem. I think for now though it's sitting okay. It's just when I'm wearing it for a long time and I'm like moving my arms around, sometimes it just, yeah, looks a little bit funny. I do really love how this sweater looks though, and I am so glad that I pushed myself out of my comfort zone to make something like this. I should definitely wear it more often, and even though it is a bit more of a statement piece, I should just embrace that and be proud that I made this and get a little bit more wear out of it. In case you're curious, this is what the inside looks like, so it's definitely something you have to be a little bit careful putting on because, yeah, I think one of these floats here is already a little bit snagged. But yeah, I'm so proud of this piece. Next is the Oh My Figure top slash sweater. I knit this in the Drops Baby Merino yarn, and it's a yarn that has been through it. It has been made into, I think, 2 other projects before finally becoming this top. This is designed by All My Knits, and I knit the dress version of this pattern quite a few years ago and always have been wanting to knit like a bit more of a sweatery top version as well. I will say that it is not a super size inclusive pattern as you buy it. It does have 10 sizes, but I think the maximum bust size is only 120 centimeters, which is not great. The designer does say that if your measurements aren't in the pattern, that you can contact them and they will do the maths for you and send you the pattern. But at the same time, if you're willing to do that, I just feel like you could just include more sizes into the pattern that people can purchase. So this is kind of like a made to measure pattern, not exactly in that you put in your exact measurements, but you are able to make quite a few fit adjustments according to differences in like your bust and your waist and your hip shaping as well, which I think is really great because obviously not everyone has the same proportions, and for something as fitted as this, you definitely want to be a little bit more precise. I absolutely love the shaping that all of the ribbing has, especially on the sleeves. Has this really fun spiral all the way around the sleeves, and just the way that the ribbing is shaped around your body, I think it is super flattering. This piece did work out relatively quickly, I think because you constantly want to get onto the next section of the ribbing, and just the way that you're working the shaping as well makes you want to keep going and you just get really into the pattern. It is a huge pattern and it can look quite overwhelming when you look at the whole thing. So it's definitely one of those things that you really just have to look at what you're doing and only focus on that, break it down into easy steps, and then just do that one section and then move on to the next one. There's also some helpful kind of like tables slash charts and some quite good pictures. I don't think there's a video tutorial. I find that it is quite easy to get by with just the tables and the photos and the written instructions. Once you kind of get past like the beginning of this, it does become a little bit more intuitive anyway. I have worn this a handful of times. As you can imagine, it's not something that I reach for in my everyday, day-to-day life. It's definitely something that I gravitate more towards if I'm going out in the evenings for like a nice dinner or a special occasion. I quite often pair this top with a black like bias cut midi skirt that I also made earlier this year, and I think it makes a really fun outfit for going out in winter, and because it is so close fitting and 100% wool, it is super warm. I have just slotted cardigans into this category as well. I only made 2 cardigans this year. This was the first one that I made. It is the Home Cardigan by Kadri, and I knit this using the Heirloom Merino Magic. It is a 10-ply worsted weight yarn, and this is not the original colour of that yarn. That was another yarn that I had frogged from a previous project that I didn't really like the fit of, and I also hated the colour of this original yarn. It was this really strange like yellowy greeny cream colour that, yeah, I just really didn't like. I don't think it suited me very well, and it's something I ordered online, so if I had seen it in person I probably wouldn't have purchased it, but seeing as I had it in my stash, I did want to put it to good use. Obviously it is brown now. I did over dye this using Rit dye, and it was my first successful over dyeing project, and I absolutely love how this has turned out. I do get a decent amount of wear out of this, and the yarn is not wearing all that great. It does have quite a bit of pilling on it, and I have de-pilled this a few times already. It's quite an inexpensive yarn, so I can't really be too surprised. It's not something I would purchase again. It's also kind of on the itchy side, which is a little bit annoying considering it is superwash merino that I thought would feel really soft, but it just kind of has the bad qualities of superwash. Like, it kind of feels a little bit squeaky. To be fair, it hasn't like grown a huge amount like some superwash yarn has, but yeah, it's probably not something I see myself using again in the future. I used these really cute brown coconut buttons that I think tied in really nicely with this. I really love the length of it. It's like a perfectly cropped cardigan. I did also modify this to have 2x2 ribbing instead of 1x1. I'm not really sure why I did that. I think I'd seen the Eva cardigan by Petite Knit a lot on Instagram, so I just kind of had 2x2 ribbing in my head, and somehow when I cast on I just ended up going with that. But yeah, I really like wearing this. I think it has a good amount of ease and it's a drop shoulder, so it just feels like a little bit more casual that I can just throw on with a pair of jeans in winter. And whilst we're talking about cardigans, this is the other cardigan that I knit this year. This is the Semper cardigan by Sophie from the Knit Pearl Girl, and I used the Knitting for Olive Merino and Mohair, both in the colour Dusty Artichoke. I know I did just say I can't really tolerate mohair, but I'm actually surprisingly finding this one is not too bad. Originally I bought this yarn and knit it into a no frills sweater. I just didn't really get very much wear out of that. I didn't really love the fit of it, and whilst it was nice to knit and I think it's a pretty good pattern, it just wasn't really me, because this yarn is definitely not the most affordable and it does feel so lovely. I did feel really bad that it was just sitting in a sweater that was never getting used, so I did frog that and wanted a nice classic v-neck cardigan instead. It has this really nice raglan construction, and yeah, it was so easy and fun to knit. I really enjoyed the process of this with using really nice yarn, and the pattern was super easy to follow. I do find that Sophie's patterns can be a little bit more wordy. I really enjoy that and appreciate all the information, and I feel like it could be very helpful for beginners, but if you're someone who likes to have a bit more of a concise pattern, this might not be the one for you. I think I knit this shortly after the Maria sweater and the Salty Days sweater, where I was having tons of issues with fit and sleeves, and this one was on and off the needles so smoothly. It was really nice. The sleeves fit me really well. They have a really nice taper without being too tight. I wasn't sure if this color really was for me, and I think that was part of why I never wore the no frills sweater. But yeah, I surprised myself, and I do actually like this color a lot more than I thought I would. It's probably not something I would buy again, and I think the main reason why I bought it originally was because this color was like super popular at the time. But at least now I know like these lighter greens probably aren't something I need a ton of more in my wardrobe. For buttons for this one, I did have these in stash already. They are these really cute pearlescent plastic buttons with this really nice silver bit around the edge. They were the perfect size for this cardigan, and yeah, I think they make it look a little bit more dressy, which is really nice. I'd love to make more of these cardigans. I think it would be really fun to have some in brighter colors and then also some in neutrals, some with mohair, some without. I think it's a really versatile pattern, kind of like the cognac sweater, that depending on the yarn that you use and the finishing, you could really change up the overall style and the wearability of this piece. When I eventually have the time and the yarn, the capacity to knit more of these, I think I would definitely like to have a few more in my wardrobe. Next up is my Lunan Polo. I test knit this for Rebecca Clow sometime earlier this year during the winter. I did modify the pattern to have long sleeves, and I also added folded edges onto the cuffs and onto the hem. I knit this in Filcolana Arvetta in the color Caramel, and yeah, it's a really great yarn. It is supposed to be a sock yarn, but I think it suits this garment really well. I've gotten a fairly decent amount of wear out of this, and it does have a little bit of pilling, and I don't think I've de-pilled this at all, and considering that it is looking pretty good. I think I have washed this a couple of times though, so maybe that's contributing to a little bit of the fuzziness. This was the first time I have test knit for Rebecca, and I'm so excited to be accepted because she is probably one of my favorite designers. The beginning of the test knit was a little bit bumpy, and I did have to rip back a lot of the progress that I'd made after I joined the front and the back yokes in the round, but she did end up resolving all of the issues that we were having, and in the end I get a pretty good fitting garment. I really love the look of the polo collar on this, and that's kind of what drew me to the pattern in the first place. I do have to say that I am not 100% happy with the fit on this in the collar. The back neck for me does drop down quite low, and it is a little bit annoying to wear. You can kind of also see that the collar does sit quite wide on me. I have a feeling maybe I should have knit the first size, and from memory there was something funny that went on when I applied for the test and the measurements that I applied for versus the pattern that I was given and those measurements. I have actually made another one of these and made a few adjustments based on this, and that one fits me a lot better. So that's just something to keep in mind if you are someone who doesn't like having a low back. Either size down or yeah, just account for that when you're knitting the yoke. The other thing is also because I modified the sleeves to be longer, I did have to kind of make up my own decreases, which I didn't do the best job of. I definitely could have made them look a little bit nicer, but to be honest, it's at the bottom of my arm and only I really know that it's there. But if I was going to do it again, I think I would, yeah, make them look a little bit better. But saying all of that, I am really happy with this garment and I do get quite a bit of wear out of it. So I'm looking forward to winter coming around and being able to wear this. Again, it's not like a super thick, heavy sweater that I can only wear on very limited, really cold days in Perth. So yeah, it's really good for the climate that I live in. I have one final sweater to show, and this is actually also a gift knit. So I knit 2 sweaters that were gifts this year. This is the Northland sweater by Petite Knit. The colour always goes a little bit funny when I'm sharing this sweater. I knit this out of Bendigo Woolen Mills Classic 12 ply in the colour Leaf, I think. I did knit this for my boyfriend and it was a super fun project to knit. So this yarn was originally knit into a zipper sweater, but as I mentioned earlier, the zipper sweater here is just a little bit too thick and he's not someone who gets super cold very often, so it didn't really get very much wear. I did offer to frog it and I'm so glad I did that and knit it into this sweater. Again, this is a sweater that was finished too close to winter, so it hasn't gotten anywhere just yet, but I think this is something that he'll reach for a little bit more often. I did knit this pattern off gauge to accommodate the yarn that I had. So the pattern is designed to use, I think, either a DK or worsted weight yarn, but this is definitely leaning more towards Aran weight. So I did have to kind of like fudge my numbers a little bit, and I ended up following the instructions for the size small and ended up somewhere between the large and the extra large to get the amount of ease that my boyfriend requested. It is a saddle shoulder construction and that was really enjoyable to knit. It's just a very classic Petite Knit pattern, very well written, very easy to follow, and yeah, just overall just a really pleasurable piece to knit. That brings us to the end of all of the sweaters that I knit this year, so let's jump into my summer knits. This is the other Lunan polo that I knit after I had done the test knit, and I wanted a summery version because this pattern was intended to be a summer design. I knit this using, I think, a 100% cotton yarn. It was something that I found in the charity shop, and originally it was like a bright white color. After the success of overdyeing my home cardigan, I did want to also overdye this one just because the yarn wasn't really a color that I liked, and it also had like a few specks of like black or brown stains on it that wouldn't come out in the wash. I did use the same RIT dye that I'd used for the home cardigan, but I didn't leave this in the dye bath for the full amount of time. I wanted it to be a lighter brown, and I think now I wish that I'd left it in a little bit longer just because it is quite faded, especially after I had rinsed all of the excess dye out. I just wish that I had left this in a little bit longer. I do still like this color and I definitely wear it more than if it was the original white color. So as the pattern suggests, I did do 1x1 ribbing on the cuffs and on the hem of the body as well. So as I mentioned before, I did make some modifications to make the neckline fit a little bit better, and I have to say I do find that this fits me a lot better in the neck. I don't find that it drops as low and the collar doesn't sit as wide, although that's maybe more to do with the fact that I knit the first size rather than the second size. There's almost no ease in this, maybe even a little bit of negative ease around the bust, but I think it looks really good. And because it is 3x1 rib, I do really like how it kind of looks like there's waist shaping, or gives the illusion of having waist shaping in there without actually having to do it. So back to the collar, in order to make the fit adjustments, I did just take out random chunks of the front yoke. I didn't really have any rhyme or reason for how I was doing that, or wasn't very like specific and measured in that. I did obviously make sure both of them are the same, but I just took out like a few centimeters here or there and it ended up being pretty good. However, I did join these two sections in the same place as the pattern recommends, and I kind of wish I kept going so this placket ended up being a little bit longer. But saying that, I would rather have a better fit in the neckline and yeah, just have this a little bit shorter. I still think it looks good, but just if I was going to make another one, that's another change that I would make. Next is my 9 PM tank designed by Tiff Knit. I knit this in the Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino in the color Strawberry Ice Cream. This is a true made to measure pattern where you put in your measurements and then it will give you the numbers that you need to use in the pattern, so you get a really good fit. I really love this square neckline, and the way that the straps are constructed is very clever. It's a little bit confusing and always takes me a few seconds to figure out what I'm doing. This is the second version that I have made of this pattern. My first version also used the Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino, but it was in a brown color, and I do prefer that one and wear it a little bit more, but I think this is like a really fun summery color as well. So this is the last summer garment that I actually have to show you. This is the Tolster tee that is once again designed by Rebecca Clow. I knit this in the Knitting for Olive pure silk, and it's the first time I had used this yarn. Unfortunately, I do not get a lot of wear out of this t-shirt. There are quite a few things that I want to change about this, and I have been seriously considering frogging it and re-knitting it. The first thing is that, again, the back neck sits a little bit too low for me, and I really need to add more short rows into it. The sleeves are also a little bit too short, and I wish I just added a tiny bit more length onto them, and the same goes for the body. It's not super cropped, but I just wish that when I lift up my arms, I had a little bit of extra length just to stop it riding up too much. I think as well, with the amount of drape that this yarn has and how it hangs so beautifully, perhaps I could have gone up a size in the pattern. I think I should have plenty of yarn to do that if I decide to re-knit this. The one thing I do really like about this garment is that I modified to have folded over edges on the neckline and also on the sleeves and the hem. So that's something I will repeat if I decide to make this again. I'm also not totally in love with the color of this yarn. I just feel like I want this to be like a really fun, bright, summery tee, and the color just kind of contradicts that a little bit. So I don't know if I would buy this yarn in this color again, but I didn't have too many issues knitting with the pure silk. I know some people say that it can be quite hard on their hands. I didn't really experience that too much, so it's a yarn I would probably use again, but yeah, just not in this color. So the final summer garment I knit this year is one that I don't have with me anymore. I knit a sea salt tee that's designed by Marin as well. I knit it out of this really nice cotton cashmere yarn in this really beautiful pink color. I ended up finishing it and did wear it a few times, and just as I was wearing it and washing it, it grew so much more than I expected it to, and it just ended up looking like I was a toddler wearing a t-shirt that was too big for them. I don't usually mind an oversized boxy tee, but I think just the design and the yarn didn't really suit having that much ease on me. I did end up, however, gifting that t-shirt to my mum, who wears it a lot more than I do, so at least it's getting some wear, and she was very happy to have another summer t-shirt. At least now I know that if I'm going to use a yarn like that, I should definitely size down, or like size down my needle, just to account for how much that yarn does grow. I would love to knit another sea salt tee this summer, so at least I have another one in my wardrobe, just maybe not in that yarn. So that is a wrap on all of the garments that I knit this year. I can quickly go through some of the accessories that I've knit. I only have one of them to show, the rest of them have all been gifted, but I think I have pictures of most of them. So the one that I do still have for myself is this really cute little dumpling bag. This is a free pattern by Pearl Soho, and I knit it in some drop saffron that I had frogged from a previous summer tank top. I use this as a project bag when I'm knitting socks, and it is just so cute. There is one handle that's longer than the other, so you can kind of thread it through like this and then have like a loop to be able to put on your wrist. I think this would be so good if you're someone who knits and walks, although if you're going to do that, maybe it's good to add a lining, just because it is a fairly loose gauge, so you don't want any of your needles or anything falling out of the gaps. It's a really great scrappy project. It doesn't use very much yarn, and you could absolutely play around with the fiber composition or the weight of the yarn and mix and match different things to make these really cute project bags. This year I also knit 2 Sophie scarves. One of them is for me, and I still have it somewhere in the house, but I just cannot remember where I put it, so that's really annoying. And the second one is one that I had recently knit for my mum for her birthday, and actually the leftovers from the Maria sweater in that really nice like burnt orangey red color. I also recently knit the watch cap and the matching fingerless mitts for my mother-in-law for Christmas. I used a really fun colorful acrylic yarn that I found in Spotlight that I think will be absolutely perfect for her. I think she's going to really like the colors of the yarn. The final thing in this category is the Sunday morning romper. I knit this for our next door neighbor who has actually just had the baby. I used a combination of a few different cotton yarns. I think the main yarn was actually some more of this drops saffron, and then I striped it with some really nice blue yarn, which looks very cute. It's a super versatile pattern that I'm really glad that I have in my library now, because it also has instructions for long sleeves. Obviously she had a summer baby, so I did want to make it short sleeves and in cotton as well. And that brings us to our final category, which is socks. So the first pair I want to show you are the Jolly Jellyfish socks, which are designed by Stone Knits. They look super crinkled. I just had to pull these out of my boyfriend's sock drawer. Good thing I have some sock blockers, so hopefully that makes it look a little bit less crinkled. These were super fun to knit. I used the Opal 4-ply sock yarn, which I think is great for color work. It gives some really good stitch definition and you can really see all of the different colors. There's also heaps of different colors of this yarn, so it's really easy to be able to pick colors for whatever color work motif you want to do. The only thing is that you do have to buy 100-gram skeins of it, so I did have heaps left over of the contrast colors. I think this light blue I used to make my dad a pair of socks, and I think I still have the purple and the orange left. Obviously the main color used up most of the skein, so I can use that as a contrast in a different pair of socks. Next are the Mudo socks by the Petite Knitter. I knit these in the recommended yarn, which is the Biche Bush Le Petit Lamb's wool. I joined in with a little mini knit along that some of the girls in my knit night were hosting. I'm now really close with both of them, so it's really nice to look back on these socks and remember that I was really shy and they invited me to their knit along and I was like, I would love to join in. And now I'm really close with both of them and they are just really great knitting people to have in my life. But yeah, these are really fun socks. I really like that I did swap the contrast color for the second sock. I remember these taking me quite a long time, considering they're not like super long in the leg or anything. They just felt like they were on the needles for ages. I also really like the contrast cast on up here and I would love to incorporate that into more socks in the future. I haven't worn these a huge amount. I am a little bit scared about holes forming in these socks just because the Le Petit Lamb's wool is a 100% wool yarn. It is quite toothy, so I think it's not, you know, the worst yarn to use for socks, but there's no nylon in there and I can already see a little bit on this heel. It's starting to wear a little bit thin, so at some point I'm gonna have to repair these. At least the good thing about these socks is that it uses like a forethought or afterthought heel, so I could just rip out the heel and put it back in again without having to undo the whole sock or repair just the heel. If I was going to knit these socks again, I think it would be good to use like the Opal 4-ply yarn. It has like a similar texture and toothiness to it, but has the nylon in there just to make it a little bit more sturdy. It's just such a shame that so much effort goes into colorwork socks and then if they're just going to get holes in them, I would feel really bad. I definitely would not gift a pair of socks out of this yarn. And another test knit that I did this year are for the Cassandra socks. I test knit these for the lovely Laura from Sunday Morning Knits, and I knit them out of Hedgehog Fibers Merino? No, it's a BFL base. Twist sock is what the base is called, and it's in the colorway Ghost, which I did pick up when I was visiting Hedgehog Fibers when I was in Ireland earlier this year. And for the contrast color, I think this is like a mini from Dying to Knit, who is like a local Perth-based hand dyer. Here's a better view of the beautiful cable that runs all the way down the front of the sock. I love how it looks and I think it looks so good paired with this folded over cuff. That's something I had never incorporated into socks before and I think it looks really beautiful. I love how it kind of like complements the overall look of the sock. I was a bit worried it would mean they would fall down, particularly because the leg is quite long, but I haven't actually found that at all an issue for me and my legs. This is a perfect pattern if you're looking for something that's like not a completely vanilla sock but has like a little bit of interest in there just to keep you going and motivated to get through the sock. This is also a free pattern, which is super generous because it's really well written and even has, I think, charts included for the cables as well. So for a free pattern, I think that is so generous. The final pair of socks that I have here to show are my Somerset socks. These are kind of similar to the Cassandra socks in that they have like a really fun motif running down the front of the sock. Here's a slightly better look at the motif running down the front. This was another project that I took back on holiday with me at the end of last year / January this year. The county where I grew up and where most of my family are living is called Somerset, so it just felt appropriate to be knitting the Somerset socks whilst I was there. I knit these out of the Manos del Uruguay Feliz yarn, which is a bit more of like a sport weight yarn, but I think this pattern actually called for a sport weight, so everything seemed to align and this was just the perfect pattern and the perfect yarn. These are constructed toe up and have a fleagle heel construction, which I don't really love. I didn't really enjoy knitting it. It felt a bit awkward and I don't really love the fit on it either. I think it would have been quite tricky to get this motif knitting cuff down. I'm absolutely no expert with knitting socks, So I probably don't have the skills just yet to be able to convert a pattern like this to be able to knit it cuff down. I do really love this Estonian braid that goes around the cuff, and it's also repeated around the toe of the sock. It's actually quite an easy technique to do, and yeah, I think it looks really nice. And just briefly, I wanted to touch on a few of the gift knit socks that I made this year that stood out to me. Most recently, I knit a pair of summer camp socks for the lovely lady who I work for. I used Filcolana Arvetta and some Cascade Heritage to knit those socks. I just really love how they turned out. I think the color combination is really nice, and yeah, I really love the sporty stripe on the top. And secondly, I wanted to mention the 2 pairs of Sasky socks that I knit this year that felt like they took absolutely ages. They were a gift knit for 2 of my cousins, and I was super worried about the fit on them. I was like, they're gonna be too small, now they're gonna be too big. But I did message them and ask them how they fit, and I don't know if they were just being polite, but they said they fit perfectly, so I'm just gonna take that as it is. One of my cousins sent me a photo and she had the socks on and she had her feet in front of the fire, and I was like, that looks so cozy and nice. So I'm quite glad that I managed to get them over to them before winter like fully came around, so that at least they can cozy up in them. And that brings us to the end of everything I knit this year. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I would love to know if you have a favorite project of mine from this year, or even what your favorite project was this year, or something that you're really proud of making. Like I said, the project I'm so proud of is definitely the Daisy sweater. The ones that I get the most wear out of are definitely my Lanark sweater and the first Cognac sweater that I made. In terms of takeaways from this year, I think the first one is to maybe really think about the size and the amount of ease that I want in a garment. Previously, I have liked having a little bit less ease in my sweaters, but yeah, I would really like to explore sweaters that have maybe a little bit more positive ease in them. I have found this year that I've really learned that lighter weight sweaters, like fingering weight ones or ones with slightly open gauges, are ones that I reach for a lot more. It just suits the weather that we get here in Perth. We have a very mild to warm climate, and it doesn't really get that humid. It rains every now and again, but it doesn't get that cold to really need a lot of super thick sweaters. The other thing I've noticed is that summer knits are just, I don't know, not really calling to me this year. I didn't make a huge amount last year, and we've been getting quite a bit of warm weather already, and I just haven't really been reaching for them or really felt motivated to knit them. Maybe I just haven't really found the right pattern. Apart from the sea salt tee and the 9 PM tank, there's not really a lot of summer patterns out there that I really want to make or really see myself wearing. I feel like having like a staple tank top pattern, a staple t-shirt pattern is like all I really need at this point. So maybe I'll just keep knitting those, seeing as I know I like them and I know that I'll get a lot of wear out of them. But I've definitely been talking for more than long enough. I can feel my voice is starting to go a little bit, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. Thank you again for watching until the end. I hope you've taken this opportunity to just relax, sit down and get some rows in, and I will see you in the new year. Bye!